Welcome to Season 2 of Another Name for Everything, casual conversations with Richard Rohr, responding to listener questions from his new book, The Universal Christ, and Season 1 of this podcast.
As mentioned previously, this podcast is recorded on the grounds of the Center for Action and Contemplation, and may contain the quirky sounds of our neighborhood and setting. We are your hosts. I'm Paul Swanson.
And I'm Brie Stoner.
We're staff members of the Center for Action and Contemplation, and students of this contemplative path, trying our best to live the wisdom of this tradition amidst adopting stray cats, rocking out to Queen with my kid, and the shifting state of our world.
This is the 6th of 12 weekly episodes. Today, we're addressing your questions on the theme of embodiment. How do we live into this incarnational worldview?
Well, Richard, today we are going to talk about embodiment and all the different manifestations and conversations that come up when we begin to think of ourselves as incarnate, as embodied beings. And there are some themes that came up a lot as we sifted through the questions. And one of them was around the energies of masculine and feminine. So we wanted to kick it off here with this question that deals with the feminine and masculine from Susan from Oak Hill, Virginia. One of my biggest spiritual challenges is the tension between the masculine and feminine forces in my life. Richard addresses what I believe to be the gifts of both. How can we, and is it still possible to, hold these gifts of disharmony while also seeking to find reconciliation and transformation in the period of waiting?
What a lovely phrase, gifts of disharmony. It tells me she's got it already. She's coming to the reconciling third, which is at the heart of everything we try to teach here at the center, that if you let things stay at their static, male, female, you're never going to get very far. They will become competitive and oppositional. But a gift of disharmony, you need a little asymmetry, a little offness on both to be recognized on both sides of any equation. And that hopefully calls both of us, first of all, to some humility about what we know and what we don't know, and who we are and who we're not, and leads us to what we might call the reconciling third. That's why I think this whole discovery of gender, National Geographic had an issue, which is not a lightweight magazine, with genders and pictures of various people who all looked like human beings, but their stories inside, I didn't read it in depth, but were revealing things that certainly when I grew up, I didn't even know the word gay. Well, it wasn't common in the 40s and 50s. But then we move into transgender, cisgender, and each time you've got to find the definition of it. It's just like coming into a whole world of mystery, which is undeniable once you meet a person. My gosh, where have they been? How did they suffer? I especially think that of transgender people. How did they suffer in previous history? Now, my suspicion is the use of that word eunuch in both the Old Testament and the New Testament was already that biblical recognition. There are peoples who are neither one or the other. You see this much more visible and accepted in India, where they walk around openly effeminate, like the native peoples had the burdash here among the Navajo, and one of our Navajo brothers told me this. Instead of this person being excluded, they were considered to be the higher, just the opposite of us. They were considered to be the more likely the medicine man in training or medicine woman, healing woman. So what has been exposed in the last 30 years to show us how utterly ignorant we were. And it's as good an example of anything, of the dualistic trap. I know I must feel like I'm beating it to death, but you just see it again and again and again. And so I love this phrase that Susan uses, the gift to hold these gifts of disharmony. It's asymmetry that makes something beautiful. We were just talking about Japan before we started recording, and what a aesthetic culture it is. I got to give a number of retreats there, and they love the asymmetrical. You'll hardly ever have, if you're walking to a private home or a park, you'll never have an angular sidewalk. It must be curving. It's not efficient at all. And then in those curves are planted trees and rocks that are asymmetrical. It's nothing like the French garden or the English garden that's, very symmetrical, almost obsessive symmetry. If you go to European gardens, it's just the opposite. No, everything is a little bit of surprise, like nature itself is. I mean, we'd all have to admit that every tree, if we look at it long enough, is asymmetrical. There's never a perfect balance. So gender is emerging in our time as a huge teaching tool about ourselves and about the world and one another. And maybe that's why there's so much pushback, although it's lessening, at least in our culture, every year it seems, as the undeniable is becoming undeniable. Yeah. But I just keep thinking of the suffering that people must have gone through. In my huge collection of aunts and uncles, 14 on one side, 12 on another, I now am pretty certain there was a gay and a lesbian aunt or uncle on both sides. I don't think that would have ever entered any of my family's mind. They didn't have a concept for it. But they never married, and they ended up being rather good caretakers for my grandparents, and it was a wonderful gift. But what sad and lonely lives they must have lived, because they were lonely, I'm sure, because the idea of going out for a night with a friend, there was no such thing as that. Yeah.
Seems as though that denial of the body that we've so adhered to in Christianity, ironically, being a religion all about incarnation, we've been so disembodied for so long that denial of the body has created so many deep wounds and problems for us. Not just as Christians, but as human beings, because I think Christianity has impacted so much of society. So you see this kind of mind-body split and a denial of our physicality. It makes me think of that line from Mary Oliver, when she says, I want to let the soft animal body love what it loves.
Love what it loves. Uh-huh.
It's just, those words hit so deeply because I think she describes it poetically so well, the soft animal body. There's like a return to a compassionate view of, these vessels that we're operating in are expressing something important and sacred.
Yeah. I have nothing to add. I think that's so well said. My mouth was just open. I mean, I think part of that speaking to that complete acceptance of just the fullness of humanity, which includes these different energies, right? And the way that I think, particularly in the West, Christianity has said, stay in your lane, this is what a man looks like, this is what a woman looks like, and then and there's nothing in between. Yeah. And even to think about, for those who identify as cisgender men, how do you incorporate the feminine when masculine culture is telling you, no, this is what a man looks like. You need to aspire to that ideal.
What he does, too, his behavior, his family roles, all determined ahead of time. Yeah.
And then we walk around living half-lives because we're only identifying with half of ourselves, half of the energy, at best.
At best.
So segueing then into this next question, speaking to the division between mind and body and the messiness of bodiliness that we often would rather not look at, Vicky from Perth, Australia asks a really amazing question. She says, since engaging in menstrual cycle awareness, where I track my cycle and what is happening to me physically, emotionally, and spiritually, something deep within me has been awakened. I'm beginning to be more in tune with my inner voice, with God who lives in me. I feel myself as more of a woman, more incarnate, and I can feel more fully the Christ presence, and I am more aware of a divine feminine. Our body as women has a natural rhythm. It reminds us that there are times to play, create, to love, to initiate, but there are also times to rest, to let go, to speak truth, and be still. My faith has taught me that, but my body is teaching me in new ways. I would love to see more Christian theology and teaching around this area, the embodiment of the universal Christ in a woman's menstruation. What does Sophia still have to unfold for us in a more open discussion about this kind of embodiment?
Well, who am I as a man?
Richard, do you want to give some reflections on menstruation?
Who am I?
I have a lot of experience in this area.
Oh my gosh, just her saying it so gently and kindly. You know, there's no accusation, there's no shaming, there's no... it's just, I'm discovering something, and it's good. Mm-hmm. But most of us were given such an aggressive stance of denial and repression toward our body. Mm-hmm. To come back out of that and to say embodiment is good and is a teacher, this is just a whole new kind of Christianity. Yeah. I have that quote somewhere in the book, don't I, from Katsensakis. Someday Christianity will discover the other part and honor the body as well as the soul. If you find it in a moment, you can read it. It's at the beginning of some chapter. I forget what I wrote.
One of the things I so appreciate about her question and the way she asked it is that you can see that for so long, and especially as women, we've been taught to feel shame about bodiliness. And it's been a tool of oppression. It's been a tool of keeping us disconnected from ourselves and disconnected from each other. And, you know, I mean, Vicky, you're already doing this. I feel like you're already giving us a Christian theology on the embodiment of the universal Christ in our cycles. Even the way you're describing that there are times to play, to create, to love, and initiate, but there are also times to rest, to let go, to speak truth, and be still. And I think that's one of the things that so many of us are longing to plug back into, even when we talk about the desire to be more connected to nature and seasonality.
Yes.
It's that we realize that there's a natural rhythm to life, and that there's we're extremely unhealthy in our culture and how we live and how we work and how we think, that we don't respect that natural rhythm and flow, that we're not giving room for letting go. We're just pushing, achieve. So, the rhythmic quality of our cycles, I think, has a lot to teach us, as the cyclical nature of everything in nature does as well.
Yeah. We thought of the body as only the shell. You know, it's only the shell. And so there became a dismissive quality to it. It's going to die, therefore it isn't worth looking at or trusting or listening to. We just found the quote, it's on the beginning of chapter 9, from Nikos Katsensakis, his marvelous book, Report to Greco. And he says, one day, the religion of Christ will take another step forward on earth. It will embrace the whole man, forgive his exclusive language. It will embrace the whole man, all of him, not just half, as it does now in embracing only the soul. Only the soul. Yeah, and you hear me say in the book, why do we say body of Christ? And we tell people to eat it, which is, I think, intentionally meant to be shocking sexual, cannibalistic, use all the shocking words, and to get us beyond this. But that's why you've heard me say for years why my history professor said we were more influenced in many ways by Plato than by Jesus. And that sounds like a terrible overstatement, but when you think about it, it's pretty true. Body was bad, spirit was good, because body died. And that body led us on the journey, and the body was the place of the training ground, the school of suffering, of delight. But we always thought of it as the shell instead of the participant. It wasn't making the journey with us as an equal teacher. So this is one of those many things that tell me we are still in early stage Christianity.
Yeah. When it comes to that, Richard, of the split that is often even just celebrated between the body and the soul in religious culture, what would you offer for those listening as ways to begin to cross over that split, to see the wholeness of body, mind, and spirit, and to not disembody on this path of transformation?
I remember talking, this was in the 70s, back in Cincinnati, to a marriage and sex therapist. I don't know what I was talking to him about. I wasn't married, but maybe he came to me for something. But he said that he had to counsel couples in the middle of their life, middle of their marriage, who the spark had gone out of it, there wasn't much affection or whatever, to spend time, deliberate time, touching one another with no movement toward intercourse. Simply the gentle touching at great length, looking, perhaps speaking, but stop this goal toward ejaculation in the male case, especially, or orgasm in the female. It's just, this is good. This is the body of God. And he claimed to me personally, he says the results of people who do this over a period is astounding, just astounding, because they rediscover embodiment in an inherently respectful way, that this is good, this is the body of God, this is something that is an end in itself. But he said he had to take away the end of orgasm and intercourse so that we could discover the medium is the message. See, that the body in its capacity for delight, for affirmation. And you think of what's happening in our, thank God in a way, but the Me Too movement, do you listen to the news a single night where the word sexual abuse is not used? It's just, we're tiring of it. But it's almost, I think, the body's revenge at not being affirmed, validated, and seen as good. It has come out in sick ways, in power-hungry ways, in abusive ways. But now it's overwhelming us. It's everywhere. So I don't know if I ever used that word before, but it does feel like the body's revenge on the spirit and the soul. If you're not going to honor me, I'm going to get your attention by showing how sick the body can become, how angry the body can become. And I think women are way ahead of us on this because they've been on the painful end of it again and again, seeing that this man is not loving me. And to call this lovemaking is just a total abuse of terminology.
It's interesting that we forget that these ideas of separating mind, spirit from body, or body from soul, are just abstract theories. We've somehow decided that that's a concrete reality. Then we operate from that reality. And, your phrase, the body's revenge, it's almost like we're seeing the results of that unhealthy philosophical framework. And I just wonder, for me, when I read the way you talk about the return toward an incarnational worldview, it feels like so healing and such a concrete response and a direct response to the gap that has been created by all of these splits. All of these, there's this, and there's that. And, they don't interact. And, I don't know that tripartite way of looking at being human is helpful anymore.
No.
And I feel like Christianity still relies on it so much that I think it's another one of those things that we're going to have to really heal and look at and turn over if we're going to continue.
We're at the end of a long period of an analysis over synthesis, where analysis was taking things apart, setting them, you just said it, in your separateness, and working with it there. And now we know there's no such thing as anything living outside of an ecosystem of relationships. There we are, back with the Trinity again.
Right. That's what just popped to my mind was the way that you're unpacking the Trinity as this flow, right? The distinction actually can be problematic at a certain stage as you try to understand that.
Yeah.
Same thing with the human, when we try to separate into three separate categories. I mean, I'm always amazed by the way our theology reflects our anthropology in so many ways, the way that interplay, when one gets healthier, it tends to deeply impact the other. And I think your work on the Trinity has helped with that owning of embodiment as well, instead of that dissection.
That even God needed embodiment, it seems. If let there be, and it all became forms of visibility. And the first day is let there be light, so you can see the visual beauty and even the visual suffering of the world. Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I wonder too if this isn't why so many of us have migrated toward, with great hunger, the mystics, to want to learn from them, because they represent an unmediated experience of God that is embodied. It's an embodied experience of God, and it sort of reclaims the body as a location, the locus in which that kind of revelation can happen. After so many years and millennia of just thinking that revelation has to happen, for those of us who are in a Protestant, probably more Protestant realm, but that revelation has already happened, it's done.
And it ended with the death of the last apostle.
There it is.
My God.
Or that it only happens intellectually through Scripture, you might receive consolations or messages from God, but it's somehow disconnected from bodiliness and being. It's not experiential, it's more intellectual.
And that to me is the draw of pilgrimage that we're seeing resurge with, what's the one in Spain again?
Camino?
Camino. Where everyone seems to be going that direction, because it is an embodied way of practicing, right?
I must get a letter every month on someone's report to me on the Camino. Yeah.
Well, we're going to keep going here with this body-spirit split conversation. With a question from Angus from Ontario. My father passed away last year, and I was with him throughout the process. The departure of his spirit from his body was stark and profound. After he passed, I remember moving around his body, trying to see my dad, but I couldn't even find an angle that looked like him.
Wow.
Since then, I have felt a deep disconnection from body and spirit. On one hand, I have never been more confident of the spirit's journey with God, but I am left saddened and confused by the disconnection of the body. I have felt that my body is just my vehicle for however long I am here, but surely there's a holiness to it that I am missing, or at least not articulating. I rarely go to my father's grave, rather feeling his presence in other places, such as his workshop that I now steward. But I like the idea of it as a place of reflection and conversation. I'm wondering if Father Richard could address his feelings of this connection and the Catholic/Christian response to the body-spirit divide.
Boy, I hope we already in the last 15 minutes have been responding to this. We just keep circling around this mystery of embodiment. The seeming departure of his spirit from his body was stark and profound. I guess those are the tears at a deathbed, that what seemed like one now seems to be totally separated. And we spend the rest of our life trying to put them back together again. How does he live? Where does he live? Does he live? That's why grief work is just one of the very best entrance ways into the spiritual journey, because it's not a problem that you can logically solve. We were talking about it a bit in the previous recording, this whole notion of how we have made them disconnected. So maybe I'm just repeating myself. But what I keep getting in these wonderful questions that have been sent to us is, you can see in every one of them, and I'm not trying to be nice to them, they already have the beginnings of the answer. And I don't know that I have it. You're on the right course. Like he's finding him in the workshop.
Yeah.
I don't need to go to the grave. That's very New Testament, although they first go to the grave, but then they find him everywhere else, even in the element of bread, in the company of people. That's the transference that I believe has to happen. So I don't know that he could ask for me to clarify this connection if he hadn't already experienced this connection. All I can really tell him to do is, yeah, trust it. You're right. You're right. This is the resurrection of the body that in some ways makes the person more real, not in all ways, but in some ways, more real after death than before. Because they're with you all the time. Not their body, but their spirit. And it becomes a kind of energetic field that we call embodiment. Isn't that amazing? So, but if we have had no respect for embodiment our whole life, I bet we wouldn't access it quite so easily, or long for it, or trust it, or allow it. Yeah. I mean, I even remember priests when we were teenage boys speaking of the genitals as the dirty parts. Don't touch your dirty parts or anybody else's dirty parts. What? And of course, you just believe what these elders are saying. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, talk about being split. I mean, everything is physical. That's all we see. And what we're saying in the Universal Christ is the respecting of that physicality in its wholeness is to see spirit. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. Mm. Not that's just a piece of wood. I'm looking at a piece of wood in our beautiful beamed ceiling here. It's not just a piece of wood. It's an epiphany into beauty, into life. That all grew out of the earth. You can still see the knots on the wood where branches came out of the tree. Suddenly it's a living organism that we've made into something that protects us from the elements. But that's beautiful. But unless you take what we would call a contemplative moment to stop and say, it's not just a roof. It's a living being that God made and yet we made. When we raise the bread and the wine at the beginning of the Mass, we say this prayer from the Passover meal. Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation. Through your goodness we have this wine to offer, fruit of the vine, came from God, and the work of human hands. It's both. And we say the same about the bread. Directly from the Passover meal. And the good people say, blessed be God forever. But there, the synthesis is spoken. It's God, but it's us, cooperating with one another. That's the incarnational mystery. So I hope that's some kind of inadequate response to Angus's beautiful comment.
I wonder why, I mean, like if we were to, just for a second, suspend the idea that we were like souls in a holding vault that then got shot down to earth and then got encased in these bodies. If we could just suspend that assumption for a while and consider them all as intertwined and interconnected as the rest of reality seems to be, then maybe we could see our bodies as expressions of the inner soul. In other words, like I think about the Velveteen Rabbit, where it's like, how do you know?
Reading that when I was young.
There's a beautiful passage, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's like, how do you know when things are really real? They're real when they are loved, and they fall apart as they are loved. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I bet you've read that to your boys.
I haven't yet, actually.
Oh, you haven't?
Saying it, I'm
okay.
like this. But there's something about the body that I think is deeply connected with the soul and the spirit. Otherwise, we wouldn't see these psychosomatic connections. We wouldn't see the ways in which they're discovering how holding anger in your stomach results in certain kinds of stomach cancer, and all this to say, what if we're here forming a soul with our body, with our spirit? What if it's all happening at the same time? And I know
that's good. That's very good.
I know it feels crazy to talk this way because it's
no.
so different than how we think. But then it makes me think, well, if we're in the process, if we're here to incarnate all of it together, then when we think about death, we think about resurrection, then we're manifesting that incarnation. Just as Jesus did. I think about his question, I no longer see my Father in his body. It doesn't look like him. And yet I'm experiencing him everywhere else. Doesn't that sound like the story of the resurrection of Jesus?
Sure does.
It's like the cook on the shore and the gardener and the, maybe there's something to this process but makes us so real, that God is making us so incarnate in this world, that when we die, we join God in everything, everywhere else. I mean, maybe, who knows, right? But that's a comforting thought for me when I think about that moment when you look at a loved one who's died and you can tell, oh, this body is, it doesn't look like them anymore, but you do experience them everywhere else. Anybody
Trapped in that's just a body worldview would not have seen Jesus as a divine figure. It's the same dilemma in seeing any other member of the body of Christ. If I'm going to insist on you're just Paul, you're just Brie, I won't get very far with knowing who Paul is or who Brie is by stopping at embodiment as just a shell. And we live in a world where the materialist worldview, I talk about that at the end of the book, really dominates. So much so that Christianity is finding it hard to communicate its own position because our people are so materialistic. They don't know how to put matter and spirit together. Yeah.
It's no wonder you look at the climate change crisis we're in.
Very good. Go there.
That we can't see that disconnect of the way we've perpetuated this, and that Christians aren't even on the forefront of the one saying, hey, we have to change our entire way of participating in the world because it's killing our planet. And I think about that split often as what does it mean to raise children in a way where I want to pass on this type of spirituality and theology where it becomes a sense of wholeness versus this is about getting you into heaven. If you could bring a few friends with you, that'd be great. But like really seeing it as a planetary project.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of what we were talking about in one of the previous episodes about what if there's an eternal consequence to our actions? Maybe that's what the concepts of heaven and hell were about. But again, because we've split everything apart, we didn't see the connection of eternal consequence in this life, in the future, what we're building, what we're doing, how we're acting. I mean, matter matters. You know, that phrase that you use and that others use, it's like matter matters. Why is that so difficult for us to accept? Why is it so hard? On that theme, Leah from New York brings up the whole teachings of the Course in Miracles. And she says, A Course in Miracles teaches that physicality is an illusion. Suffering and illness are errors in thinking, and that Jesus didn't suffer on the cross because he knew, I'm not a body. I have many friends who are totally dedicated to this path. They wear t-shirts with bold letters saying, I'm not a body. My friends tell me this is truth, and she capitalized truth, all caps truth, that it's Jesus' correction to Christianity. But I'm convinced of an incarnational worldview. Can you address the enormous popularity of A Course in Miracles, which I understand to be a spiritual worldview that claims to be dictated by Jesus, and the truth about God?
Well, I have to start by pleading a good degree of ignorance. I didn't know the Course in Miracles taught that. I'd always heard their good teaching about forgiveness. And so I've often praised the Course in Miracles that we didn't teach forgiveness enough, and they put it center stage. But remember at the end of the book where I talk about the four worldviews. Yeah. If what Leah says is the case, and I have no reason to doubt it, this is what I term the spiritual worldview. I'm not a body, and almost taking delight in this. Yes, I'm not limited to my body. I could agree to that. But saying I'm not my body, no, I am my body. So it might be a stage of teaching. I mean, I think we probably all were taught early, my soul lives forever and my soul's going to go to heaven. And there are ways that that's important to learn, but that's early stage Christianity, it seems to me. When Jesus says, store up things in heaven, not in this world where rust corrodes and moth consumes. It could appear that he's making that distinction. And remember, I always say you got to start with dualistic clarity, body, soul. He's trying to get us to see the invisible, the non-tangible, but then the final mature teaching of Jesus is the two are operating as one in his body, even allowing it to be crucified, and it is body that is resurrected. That's no small point, that his body is resurrected. So if what she says is true, I don't agree with that. I am my body, but I'm not only my body. Right. Yeah, okay.
I think it's dangerous, and I'm not familiar with A Course in Miracles, but any ideology that teaches us that suffering and bodiliness isn't real feels like a dangerous foundation for a lot of the type of injustice, oppression, abuse that we see in our world.
That's the perfect answer to that. I didn't respond to that, but you did. Jesus didn't suffer on the cross because he knew I'm not my body. That's not true. I don't think. Yeah.
And I suppose too, the things that make us most human, like we've talked before about how much suffering connects us to each other, how it opens up our awareness and brings us into it, transformative moments. Like to think that, I'm sorry, but like I'm thinking about childbirth and I'm like, oh no, that suffering was real. That was very real suffering. And I was very much in my body through that childbirth process. And yet,
yes, you weren't just saying, I'm not my body,
right.
I'm not my body.
And I did the whole hypnobirth thing, ladies. Like I really worked on that, like to be deeply relaxed, all the rest of it. But the idea that we're trying to extract the messiness or suffering out of the human experience, it seems antithetical to this move toward healing and wholeness and softening and respect and justice and
Yeah. Show me a person that you think is whole who's also not embodied, right? Like everyone that I look up to in that way, there's this full acceptance of their entire humanness, the wholeness of body and spirit together. I think whenever I face that distinction in a person, especially in the spiritual world, you kind of get the sense of they're trying to pull one over on me, or it's bypassing to get to a spiritual truth that doesn't have that weight behind it, because it is so separated from the human experience.
And on the other side, you meet what we unkindly call anal retentive people, but rigid people. They're always deeply repressing things in their body or their body itself.
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
That is so obvious at my age. People who even in their body movements experience, you can see the resistance. You can feel the repression.
Yeah. Well, we have a question here from Rachel from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And this will kind of continue the thread of embodiment and also how others view us and how we view ourselves. In a culture that has defined the ideal as cellulite-free, thin, and looking like less than perhaps 1% of humanity probably look, how can we reclaim the joy of our bodies, embodying with joy and gratitude for the magnificence of very ordinary, even that shows cultural bias, non-skinny, yet fully alive and wonderful human bodies?
I'm probably showing my own bias. I brought over this morning, because I'm collecting a number of things, a bunch of pictures of when I was young and handsome. And it's so neat not to need to be that way. So maybe we need to listen to elders more, who know they are their body, can accept, in this case, being overweight, as I am right now because of this dang pill I'm on. Well, probably because I eat too much too. But
those pills are just jelly beans.
I'll keep blaming it on the pill. But why doesn't it bother me? Is that laziness? And I've been asking myself that. But my physical attractiveness, simply I know now at a much deeper level, is not me. So do we need people who aren't, we used to speak of these thin women as twiggy. That's before your time.
That is a long time ago. I know what you're talking about, and that is like a solid
30 years ago, Twiggy. I don't know who the present Twiggy is, but
there's a few.
It's not good.
Yeah.
It's not. I was, as you know, recently in Mexico, and you'd see these lovely young Mexican girls, just gorgeous. And it was so clear in that culture that as soon as they have a baby, they start broadening out, Mm-hmm. It was even pointed out to us, since we're on Mexico, that that icon of Our Lady of Guadalupe, she's a rather medium-sized woman. And they said that is just affirmed. Some people have made this case in the whole Mexican culture. That's the ideal woman. A woman who's born children and has her body to show for it. So our model is very recent, very limited, and very condemning.
It seems that part of our issue here with bodiliness is also just change. We're so afraid of aging, of changing, of growing older, and I feel like society has created an ideal out of a young body, whether it's male or feminine or female or any gender. It's the youth of, thing that we're looking toward, and just how unhealthy that is in terms of our own journeys of change. Like how how much disrespect it shows to ourselves, to our bodiliness, to the whole way of everything, for us to somehow try to freeze time on one particular segment of our lives as though we could keep it that way forever.
Yes.
And I think, kind of back to something you said, Paul, like the women that I have met in my life that are most alive and most free, and I really want to emphasize the freedom, because that is what is absent in our culture of bodiliness or body obsession, in terms of being thin or young or beautiful. We're not free when we're living from that obsession. But when I meet elder women who are free from that, it's the level of relaxation that I feel in my body and in myself, and the relaxation into beingness period that I feel is so profound and is such a gift. And we need so much more of that as an antidote to this madness.
Yeah. In some ways it's the gift of baldness. I think about...
Thank you.
Go
ahead.
Being a young man who went bald after having long blonde hair, I was often...
Flowing, you forgot the flowing.
Yeah, wavy. And it was often...
You have to bring some pictures, Paul.
I should. I got to bring them to this collection.
I'd love
I'll
to
post
see
online.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, Richard, for you, like when was a time... Like you talk about how you don't care right now. When did that transition happen for you, when you were able to kind of say, you know what, like these standards that's set by culture just don't matter?
Somewhere in the 60s, where I knew it was an impossible game to keep trying to look. Certainly when all my hair was gone, and when I lost my boyish figure. They say that begins at 27. Are you on the other side of 27?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. At 27, you begin to lose your boyish figure. But you can't help but want to be attracted to go back to that, because it's what the culture admires. So men face this too. It's not just women. Maybe it's not put on us as much.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, can I also present a foil to this, which is also another thing that I think we can fall into? I'll use myself as an example. In my 26, 27 range, as I was diving headlong into contemplation and the mystics, I sort of vacillated from indulging in my appearance to this opposite extreme of denying, where all of a sudden I thought the spiritual thing would be for me to just shave my head and not care at all about how I look. And in a way, which is true in some ways, but I went to this extreme, which I now lovingly call my contemplative frumpy phase, where it was like, how can I make sure that you can't see a figure under here? How can I wear baggy clothing? How can I prove to everyone that I'm so spiritual by like not wearing makeup and not caring, And it was another extreme. So somewhere between indulging and denying is a middle road of accepting. And I think for women, this is really hard, because we vacillate, I think, in contemplative or spiritual circles between wanting to deny our femininity, not just I get like, I don't want to play into cultural obsessive norms, right?
Yes.
But I also don't want to collapse into like, back to my contemplative frumpy phases. In a way, what I was doing was denying my femininity. I was trying to hide myself.
I can't think of a Catholic nun who wouldn't agree with every word you just said.
Yeah.
Because that's what we put on them. This temporarily probably appropriate thing. But imagine having to wear that your entire life, and even to sleep in it. Denying your femininity, denying your embodiment, pretending you don't have breasts. It's just horrible.
Or not wanting to look pretty for a date, it's like, I don't want to guilt myself for putting on mascara one night, it's like.
Yeah. And the archetypes have been so much of the virgin or the prostitute, right? It's in Christianity as those that have been like it's not an either or. And I'm not, I know I'm in dangerous territory here, even just like naming that, but like that's been like how far apart you either fall into one category or the other. And
we live from that. I think that's part of the grief that I hear in Rachel's question. Is that we're paranoid, or we're struggling to find the right avenue of just being in our bodies and to trust that this is good and to feel permission to express ourselves on occasion, to want to get dressed up or not, but not become slaves to it either. I think of the work of Mirabai Starr, actually. She recently wrote a book about called Wild Mercy on the feminine path. She has some amazing passages, but in one of them she says, you know what? She's like, yes, I meditate and I am one with the beloved. And sometimes, I'm sorry, I care about what my ass looks like in jeans. And you know what? It's just so human of her to admit that.
Sure.
That when I read that, I found myself laughing and relaxing and saying, yeah, let's make sure that we hold freedom all the way through and find that middle path of acceptance, as hard as it is.
Well put.
Oh. Speaking of acceptance.
Are you looking at the notes?
I didn't even realize this was coming up next. Ernie from Ontario, Canada. Wait, is that California? Yeah.
Ontario, right? California.
Okay,
yeah.
So Ernie from Ontario, California is asking this very question on acceptance. He says, do we have something that is built in that distracts and blocks us from accepting that we are fully accepted? And if we do, how do we get rid of it?
I think that is so real, and that's why Augustine, who had a lot of sexual self-hatred and guilt, coined that unfortunate phrase, original sin. There seems to be something inherent in the human being that obsesses over its imperfection, which is an ego trip. What makes me think I, in my separateness, could be perfect? And really, what I would say, the only way to overcome it is union, not private moral perfection, but union with the whole body of Christ. We are holy. We are good. We are Christ. It's an act of solidarity with the whole that allows you to accept your own privately being just a part. I'm a part. I'm not the whole. But our individualism here works against us again because we want to independently be totally acceptable. So it's an ego trip. I really think it is. Once we let go of that grain of wheat, as Jesus puts it, that set of boundaries, then my wholeness is in my connectedness, not my private perfection. Not my private worthiness. So he says, is it built in us? Well, I've called it the fly in the ointment, that there does seem to be a problem in the human psyche, the human soul, that sets us up for the drama, for the conflict, for the necessary tension. Yet it is very hard to accept that we are fully acceptable. And I've met very gorgeous women and good-looking men, intelligent women who suffer from it just as much. And those of us who are more ordinary say, well, surely not you. They do. In fact, they almost have a race more to cover it up because they know that everybody projects onto them this, oh, you've got it all together.
Yeah. And Rich, can I ask you, what does that look like for you as somebody who people do look up to, and knowing that those projections come onto you? How do you handle that, knowing that that acceptance is not the acceptance that you're necessarily seeking?
That's been a problem much of my public life for 30, 40 years, that both people who hate me for there's probably some good reasons to hate me, but the one they picked out really isn't it. It's their own problem projected onto me. But on the other side, those who love me and think I'm this little God, if they only knew how so you learn, you've heard me say this before, you learn by the middle of life not to take either projection too seriously. People who think you're greater than you are, and people who think you're a total hypocrite, fool, idiot. Neither of them are people who usually know me. And I think that's why we all long for someone who knows the real me, warts and all, and can still believe I'm lovable. Don't we all long for that? Without that, I don't know there's ever grace to move ahead. And we start with that. I certainly started with that with my mom and dad. So I got off to a good start. That the whole room lit up when I ran into the room. You know, little Dickie is here. We're all happy and we pass him around and kiss him. But then you spend the rest of your life wanting that moment to be repeated. Someone else to pass me around and kiss me. Yeah. But it doesn't really, you don't have to constantly have a perfect mirror in your life. It's enough if it's there a few times. If you've never had it. Now, I have met people who, because they never had it, even from their parents, do feverishly search for it from God. I have met some people like that. They're wonders of nature. But for most of us, we need the mirroring from one other human being that fully accepts us in our lowliness, as Mary says in the Magnificat. People who think I'm wonderful, who don't know who I am, it really doesn't do anything for me. Do you understand? But like you on the staff who've seen how ordinary I am, when you still put up with me or like me, that means much more. You know? And it's true for all of us, I think.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it too, when you said the baby, my son is 7 months old now, and like the moment I walk into the room, he just starts smiling.
Oh God, that must make you happy.
And you just think, I haven't done anything.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, I provide a lot less than his mother does.
Daddy.
You know what I mean? If I just walk in, he just starts getting giddy. And it's that.
He knows.
I love what you said too, but like, that it doesn't have to happen all the time.
No, it doesn't.
It's enough that it happens where you have that felt sense of I am fully accepted just as I am, and that could be enough fuel in the tank to go through walk through a lot of swamps and dark areas.
That's right. But only the contemplative mind will receive that, be imprinted by that, and own that. If you're just, oh yeah, you like me, you have to taste love. You have to enjoy love. You have to let that love be imprinted on you.
I think too, experiencing forgiveness, like the fullness of that moment, like, and nowhere more for me than from my own children. You know, I had a moment last week where I was feeling pretty good like you were. I'm feeling pretty like, oh, I'm a pretty great parent. My son, Soren, who's 9, was hyperventilating about something, not literally, but just being dramatic and freaking out about some homework. And he's like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get it. And so I like walked him through this breathing exercise to slow him down, to calm him down. And we're doing this breathing exercise. And I'm like, man, I am winning as a mom right now. Like, I'm doing so great. And right in that moment, as he's starting to calm down, Rowan, my 6-year-old, who's, you know, on the other bed in the room, he goes, Mom, you know what sound you make when you're frustrated? And I was like, no. And he goes, and then he did this gesture with his hands outstretched and his eyes up at the ceiling. And then he kept doing it. He did it like 4 more times. And it was so humiliating to realize, like, oh yeah,
how they've got all your mannerisms down.
They've got me down, and they're seeing all my crap. And it just, as I put them down that night, like I was so embarrassed. And then I actually just like was giving them hugs, and I was telling them, I'm so sorry that you see me frustrated sometimes. I'm sorry that I'm sorry that I'm not more patient or more kind. And the way that they receive that and look at me with love and say, it's okay, Mama.
Yeah. See?
You know, I have hard days too, Mama. It's okay. And I'm just like,
isn't that beautiful?
That experience of forgiveness, that I think, that helps me. I mean, and it doesn't feel like I can get to that acceptance within myself, but when I see it in them, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. There it is.
That they know you're ordinary and yet you're good.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to shift gears a tiny bit here to talk about a question from Andy from Atlanta, Georgia. Andy says, I'm a lay minister and I encounter people who are so focused on issues of sexual immorality. Talk about the evils of secularism and the sexual revolution. and how we need to uphold the church teaching on these matters. I never know how to respond. How does this, which is a concern for certain morals, fit within the contemplative context?
I know I've already quoted it twice, but let me do it once more. I find Ken Wilber's 4-part distinction so helpful. What he's talking about here is the first stage, and the first necessary and good stage, which he calls cleaning up. Without an appropriate sense of boundaries, self-definition, and even the ability to say no to yourself. We call it the sacred no in men's work. That's what early stage morality needs to be. If you can never say no to yourself, you actually lose respect for yourself. You do. If you constantly give in, you say, is there anything here that has some kind of inherent value? That's the meaning of the necessary sacred no. So his parishioners are right in that we need to insist on a basic cleaning up. It's those people who go further. Like Paul says, I was the best of the Pharisees. He starts there with a kind of rigidity, I'm sure, about all the Jewish laws. But then as you continue to grow up, you realize purity codes, and that's the beginning stages of almost every religion. Don't touch this. Don't go there. Don't align yourself with that kind of person. That is not yet love. It's the creating of the self, what I call the first half of life. So you got to do that. People who create an ego are most prepared to let go of an ego. That's such a paradox. So you want to affirm those folks, but you better not make that the be-all and the end-all of Christianity. Or you get into Puritanism, moralism. We used to call it in Catholicism Jansenism. It's all about purity codes. And I think we can safely say Jesus doesn't waste any time on purity codes. He assumes, well, you took care of that in grade school, in high school especially, probably. Learning the sacred no, learning appropriate boundaries, you have a right to protect your body and you don't invade other people's bodies. Now I know that takes the form of commandment, which is the only thing a 17-year-old can understand, filled with hormones. You may not do that. It's a mortal sin. Now we say, well, are we really upsetting God? Probably not. But now we see that there's some real good social, cultural reasons. Wow. Yeah. So maybe your neighbors need you not to do that. And maybe you need not to do that. So we call it sin perhaps too easily. So cleaning up is the starting place. Those who do that well will be most prepared to go on to growing up. And that's most of your middle years. Starting, I hope, in college and going through the 40s, where you're just learning more and more about what works, what's helpful, what's real, what harms, what wounds. We go down all kind of dead ends. We over-identify with all kind of movements and groups. This is the only answer, this one or that one. And usually the waking up, you're ready for the waking up around then. And we talked about Pentecostalism on the first day. Yeah. See, there was a waking up experience, but what they had to do is go back and clean up and grow up. And most of them weren't willing to do that. Mm-hmm. They thought, well, I'm awakened. Right. You need all stages. Mm-hmm. The easy sequence is the one I named, or Ken Wilber named. Cleaning up, growing up. Then you're ready to know what waking up means and what it doesn't mean. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you're better than everybody else, all right? It means I and the Father are one, and it's completely a gift of grace that is given to you, which then thrusts you naturally, not by guilt, not by shame, not by obligation, not by duty, thrusts you into the fourth stage of showing up. My God, I've been given a gift of freedom and love. And with this kind of freedom and love, the only thing you want to do is hand it on to other people. So that's probably more an answer than Andy wanted.
It's so helpful because I think culturally we're obsessed with waking up, but don't want to deal with the other stages. Right. And especially I feel like in our millennial generation, everybody wants the quick access route to mysticism and transcendent experiences without the discipline of cleaning up and awareness of morality, the capacity, which you said, if you don't say no to yourself, you lose respect for yourself. Well, there is no discipline. It seems, I shouldn't be so extreme, but it seems like there's such a lack of discipline in learning detachment or learning self-restraint. So then it just becomes this everything goes.
I know.
Just find your bliss. Like, oh, I'm just going to find my transcendent experience of oneness and then treat everybody like shit, Right. It's like, and then be a terrible person. But look at me, I have my meditation and my, transcendent moments.
Yeah, I was lucky. My older brother one time gave me the advice to make sure that you say your no to make room for the bigger yes.
No, that's lovely.
So your no's help create that space to say yes.
That's lovely.
And it's a different spin on discipline for me that has really helped, hopefully, form me in a way that has created more potential.
Yeah. And you talk about, Richard, that, again, back to our comment about if this is a relational universe that we're swimming in, then embodiment has to be about right relationship. It has to be about sensing the connectivity to the whole and living out of respect to that connectivity in some way. And I feel like Josh from Portland asks a question that has to do with that connectivity as we wrap up here. He says, my question for Father Richard is about his reference to the sacredness of the world, in environment, humans, animals. He mentions respecting, protecting, and loving it. I was just curious if he was subtly referencing vegetarianism or veganism since it impacts global gas emissions, poverty, and animal abuse. And I think his question here is, pertaining to the bodies that aren't human, and how do we need to be more responsible in our choices toward that relationality to the whole?
Once you learn the art of union and connection, it doesn't really matter what you're connected to. They all serve the same function. And your connection to an animal or to the earth or to a plant is serving the same function for your enlightenment as to another human being. Now, because we haven't emphasized that, people think the only meaning of the gospel is to love other human beings. I guess I didn't have veganism, vegetarianism directly in mind, but I think that's a very good corollary. I don't think we want to now make a commandment out of it. Then you go back to the purity code level, but that some enlightened people are going to come to that conclusion that I just don't like ingesting animals.
Because of the whole impact it creates.
Yes, what it's doing to the planet by having so many cattle. Their analysis is invariably right. This can't continue if the world population is going to increase the way it's increasing. So he's right. I have always made a point of why didn't Jesus ever once emphasize diet at all? I think because he saw the danger of making it into a purity code. But I can't believe that he wouldn't have eaten very responsibly, caringly, contemplatively, but just don't make a religion out of it, that's all, by which you will judge other people. And I must say, very happily, most of the friends, in fact, all of them that I have, seem so free about it. I'll apologize. Now, I don't eat red meat, but because of my hypoglycemia, I need protein at most meals, so I'll have chicken or fish. And I never feel judgment from my vegetarian friends, and I don't even need to explain it to them.
I think that the incarnational worldview that you're inviting us into helps us to feel a greater sense of embodiment and presence to our bodies in all of these ways that we've been talking about. But one that comes to mind as we're speaking about food is the right relationship to food, but also the right relationship to pleasure and joy and abundance.
Yes.
And how much that is also a part of being embodied. And as our closing question, I have a memory. I don't know if you have a memory like this, but I have a memory of sitting on the beach of Alexandria in Egypt, eating the world's most perfect orange. And I don't know why. Every time I think about this, the sensation of pleasure of eating, I can put myself right back there on that beach. And I'm telling you, that orange was like eating the sun. And so I'm just curious, Richard,
do I have such a moment?
As we close off this episode on embodiment, do you have a moment of deep joy and pleasure in tasting food that connects you in a way to everything?
What just flashed into my mind was when I was giving a retreat. I'm back in Japan. And I'm back in my little room. The window is open, and I'm looking at eye level at blowing grasses. I can still... I think it was the sensitivity of the Japanese culture that made me more sensitive, and everything is coming to life. Maybe it's where I'm at. I'm in my 40s then. But I just literally wanted to grab a clump of that grass and eat it and ingest it. It was so beautiful. It was so wonderful. It was so it. Whatever it is, I'm a part of it and it's a part of me. I don't think I did actually, but I imagined myself doing it and wanted to do it in a way. I didn't deny myself. I finally got to the point where I could ingest its beauty without really eating it. Yeah. It's like tantric sex, I just without really eating it.
On that note,
You better eliminate that from
that's so good.
That'll be the episode title.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
And that's it for today's episode of Another Name for Everything with Richard Rohr. This podcast is produced by the Center for Action and Contemplation, thanks to the generosity of our donors.
The beautiful music you're listening to is provided by Bird Talker. If you're enjoying this podcast, consider rating it, writing a review, or sharing it with a friend to help create a bigger and more inclusive community. To learn more about Father Richard and to receive his free daily meditations in your electronic mailbox, visit cac.org.
To learn more about the themes of the Universal Christ, visit universalchrist.org.
From the high desert of New Mexico, we wish you peace and every good.